The Moth podcast shares incredible true stories told live. And for our next episode, we're going for gold.
As I made my way around the track with my American teammates, in a crowd of 100,000 people, as if they were the only ones in the stadium, I saw my parents.
3 stories all about the Olympics. This special episode's available right now. Subscribe to the Moth podcast to make sure you hear it.
Hi, Sportly listeners. Just a heads up. Today's episode covers sensitive topics, including self-harm, death, and attempts at suicide. So please take care while listening. It's April 2016, and the 31st annual Marathon des Sables is underway. This legendary race is a brutally hot 150-mile run through South Morocco, a run which just so happens to be in the Sahara Desert. Split across 7 days, it's known as the toughest foot race in the world. Among the competitors is British veteran Duncan Slater, a 37-year-old double amputee attempting the race for the very first time. Participants come from all over the world. Alongside Duncan are 1,000 other runners from France, Morocco, the United States, Italy, Russia, and beyond. It's a marathon for boundary pushers across the globe. And it's a really big deal that Duncan is here today. While serving in Afghanistan back in 2009, his vehicle was blown up and he suffered severe injuries. His legs were so mangled that doctors eventually decided that amputating both legs was his best option. To Duncan, this was devastating. He was staring at a future he could never have imagined. But he was determined to still live his life to the fullest, especially as a new dad.
I went to see a specialist and he goes, what do you want out of life? What's the thing that you want to be doing? I want to walk my daughter to school. That's my event horizon. That's what I want to be doing.
Now, Duncan has set his sights on extreme physical challenges. Just a few years earlier, Duncan skied through Antarctica to reach the South Pole. Today, he's ready to tackle the Marathon des Sables, a test of endurance in the opposite climate, with extreme heat instead of cold. On day 1, which usually covers around 18 miles, Duncan performs well despite the challenging conditions. The intense heat alone discourages many, and the dense, dusty sand drains the runner's energy as they have to remain vigilant for snakes and scorpions hiding beneath the surface. Every 6 miles, there's a checkpoint offering water, the only resource the race provides beside the small bivouac tents for overnight rests. Medical teams are on hand in case of emergencies. For food, participants rely on their own supplies. Energy bars are a popular choice for their high calorie content and portability. After some rest and a much-needed water break, Duncan continues his journey. Day 1 concludes, and day 2 is more of the same. More sand, rocks, and relentless sun. By days 3 and 4, the physical toll becomes more evident. This stretch of the race, about 50 miles long, must be completed within roughly 34 hours. For context, that's the equivalent of running 2 marathons in less than 2 days. Like many others, Duncan alternates between running and walking, but the challenge is immense. The skin around his amputations blisters and becomes damaged. By the end of day 4, Duncan realizes he has an infection in his legs, a serious and potentially life-threatening condition. So after all that he's been through, he has no choice but to withdraw from the race. However, the desert continues to call, the unfinished challenge lingering in his mind. Will he return next year to finish what he started? Or has the intensity of the Marathon des Sables claimed victory over him? Hey everyone, it's your host Kavitha Davidson, and welcome back to Sportly. Every week, we dive into sports history, spotlighting iconic events, remarkable athletes, and uncovering the lesser-known yet impactful moments both on and off the field. In this episode, we're spotlighting one of the toughest foot races in the world, the Marathon des Sables, or Marathon of the Sands, MDS for short. This brutally hot 150-mile run takes place in the sweeping Sahara Desert dunes of South Morocco. Each year, over 1,000 people participate in this event, which includes 9 days in the desert. While there's now a newer, shorter form of the race, today we're focusing on the Marathon des Sables Legendary, the oldest and original race format. The MDS Legendary is nearly entirely self-sufficient. Runners like Duncan are responsible for their equipment and food, with the organization providing only water at checkpoints and basic bivouac tents. A medical team is also on site because, obviously, nobody wants runners to suffer serious harm. Now, the race isn't just a test of physical endurance, it's also a question of how far one can push their body and mind. The MDS, about 6 times longer than a standard marathon, confronts participants with temperatures up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit and challenging sandy and rocky terrain. What motivates people to undertake this extreme challenge? What strategies do they use to navigate the harsh environment? And for repeat runners, what keeps them coming back? Today, we'll explore the history of this ultramarathon and its unique process. And along the way, we'll share the inspiring stories of some runners bold enough to take it on. It's 1984, and 28-year-old Patrick Bauer is restless and unsatisfied. After spending 2 years in West Africa, where he made a living selling encyclopedias and medical books, Patrick finds himself living with his parents back in France. Despite his French heritage, he feels disconnected from the place he's supposed to call home. The urge to pack up and leave is just too tempting. After so much time away, maybe his own home now feels foreign, or perhaps it's simply that Patrick has developed an insatiable appetite for the thrill of travel. So one morning, he wakes up with a wild idea: to cross the Sahara Desert on foot. The vast expanse of the desert beckons, a stark contrast to the familiar streets of France. It's a challenge he can't resist, a chance to push his limits and explore the unknown. Now, his idea isn't entirely random. Patrick has crossed the desert a few times by car while living and working abroad, and the barren, largely uninhabited terrain continues to call to him. When he shares his idea with his brother, it's dismissed as a nightmare. But for Patrick, it's a very real dream. Just 3 weeks later, he sets out for the Sahara. Patrick's journey begins on January 12, 1984, in Tamanrasset, an oasis city in southern Algeria. Though the Sahara is mostly desolate, communities like Tamanrasset provide some habitability. But Patrick aims to avoid villages and water-filled oases, preferring to explore the uncharted and uninhabited areas. During the day, temperatures in January can be relatively mild, around 65 degrees Fahrenheit, easing his daytime travel. At night, temperatures drop to about 45 degrees, and Patrick has only a sleeping bag for warmth. For 12 days, Patrick's world consists of traversing vast stretches of sand dunes and fiery orange rocks, covering nearly 19 miles daily. Though he passes a few people, including truck drivers, tourists, and members of the nomadic Tuareg community, he remains self-sufficient, relying on his packed resources and not seeking help from others. Patrick's journey concludes in the small Algerian town of N'Gezam. After traveling approximately 217 miles in nearly 2 weeks, he feels an incredible sense of relief and a bit of sadness. You see, he's grown to love the barren terrain of the Sahara and later calls it one of his greatest adventures. The journey tested his endurance, mental fortitude, and physical fitness, leaving a lasting impact on his life. Upon returning to France, Patrick shares his experience with friends and potential sponsors. Though he piques the curiosity of local runners, few are eager to undertake such a demanding journey alone. And with that in mind, Patrick decides to organize an official event. The first official Marathon des Sables takes place in 1986, 2 years after Patrick's solo trek. Only 23 people participate, most of them French. Unlike Patrick's original route through Algeria and Niger, the inaugural race crosses the Moroccan Sahara. At less than 150 miles, the race is slightly shorter than Patrick's journey. At the end of the inaugural race, there are 2 winners, a man and a woman, both from Patrick's home country of France. They are the first in a long line of winners who will tackle the event year after year. Despite the heat, sand, and limited resources, the marathon's popularity continues to rise, and by 1989, 170 people enter the race. In 1997, we meet 2 brothers from Morocco who will come to dominate the race, Lahcen and Mohamad Ahansal. The brothers are from a rural town near Zagora in southeastern Morocco. Coming from a nomadic family, their daily life as young boys revolved around sheep and goat herding. For them, the Sahara Desert is not a foreign or perilous place, but a familiar and beloved home. Lahcen's childhood was marked by frequent running, especially as he commuted to school on foot. Mohamad's introduction to competitive running came at 17, when he won second place in a local barefoot race. Their first encounter with the MDS was from the sidelines, as they watched the marathon runners pass through Zagora. In 1991, Lahcen attempts to participate unofficially. You see, the race required an entry fee, which Lahcen could not afford, so he wasn't considered an official competitor. Although he was in the lead towards the end, he fell back to let the official runner win. Determined, Lahcen secured sponsorship the following year and officially entered the race in 1992, finishing in 3rd place. He has competed almost every year since. His brother Mohamad joined the race in 1996, finishing 5th, just behind Lahcen. By 1997, both brothers are seasoned MDS competitors. Fortunately for Lahcen, who has trained hard and become accustomed to the heat, this year is his year. In the race's final stage, he outpaces the top 2 runners, both of whom are international long-distance running champions. He's 30 miles ahead when he crosses the finish line in 1st place. A year later, his brother Mohamad wins his first race, and over the next several years, the 2 brothers dominate the finish line. Lahcen wins 9 straight races from 1999 to 2007 and holds the record with 10 total victories in the Marathon des Sables. Then Mohamad takes the mantle, winning 4 races after that. What makes the Ahansal brothers return to such a difficult race time and time again? After all, they've proven to themselves and the world that they're more than capable of completing the course. In interviews, the brothers express their love and appreciation for running itself. For Lahcen, it's an expression of a healthy life, while Mohamad speaks to feeling connected to nature. He says he loves the desert. It's peaceful and quiet, without any cars or computers. You see, it's not necessarily about winning, even though that's certainly a part of it. Their legacy has brought pride to their communities as well. Each time one of the brothers wins, it's a victory for their hometown. Now, you might be wondering why people compete in this race, and people have all different reasons for it. Regular winners, like the Ahansal brothers, are likely motivated differently from the one-timers, the runners who have never claimed a win, or those who prefer to walk the course, for whom the journey is more important than victory. For many, it's also about survivalism. Remember that this race is built to be self-sufficient, mirroring Patrick Bauer's initial trek through the desert. Aside from water checkpoints, tents for sleeping, and a professional medical team, you're pretty much on your own. Runners are required to bring essentials like a minimum amount of food, a sleeping bag, a headlamp, disinfectant, a GPS, and a compass. But there are other supplies that seem necessary for the journey, like toilet paper, water bottles, extra clothes, soap, utensils. Part of the challenge in this race is efficiently rationing your resources, surviving on the basics, and making do with far less water and fewer calories than you're typically used to. For many, that's also the appeal of the Marathon des Sables. Patrick Bauer described the experience as a nice escape from our busy lives, taking you, quote, back to the basics. And that alone is a transformative experience. Sitting beneath the stars, laughing with others around the campfire, it's simple, with no luxuries, and even, in his own words, primal. It not only tests you, but brings out your core values and reminds us all just how tiny we are in this vast universe. It isn't without challenges. In 1994, one participant would be forced to put his survivalism to the ultimate test in what would become one of the race's most harrowing and iconic stories of grit and perseverance. In 1994, Mauro Prosperi, a 39-year-old former Italian Olympic pentathlete and police officer, lines up for the 8th annual Marathon des Sables. It's Mauro's first year, and he finds the desert a marvelous place. Mauro, no stranger to tough physical activity, takes on the challenge with enthusiasm. After an intense training regimen, including long daily runs and reduced water intake, he feels prepared for the race. Mauro starts out fine, with the first 3 days passing smoothly. On the 4th day, during the race's longest stage, Mauro's journey takes a turn for the worse. The morning begins as usual, with all the runners starting together. But with time, Mauro, who had been fast and steady, finds himself alone. Now that's not too surprising when there are only 80 other people running. After passing through several checkpoints, Mauro stumbles upon sand dunes. The wind picks up, and before he knows it, he's caught in a sandstorm. In a blinding swirl of yellow and orange, he only has one option. He has to keep moving to avoid being buried, walking with the wind at his back to keep the sand out of his face. As he would later say, it feels like a storm of needles, and he endures this for 8 long hours. More than anything, Mauro is bummed about the race. He had been in 4th place, and now this 8-hour sandstorm has knocked him off his game. Morning comes, and Mauro runs for hours until he finally realizes that he's lost. He doesn't panic, but takes precautions. With very little water left, he urinates in a spare bottle and drinks his water sparingly. He only walks early in the morning or at night to avoid the hottest part of the day. Otherwise, he feels okay, mostly thanks to the items he'd packed for the race, his food and supplies, and a small knife. For the next 10 days, Mauro struggles to survive in the Sahara. He has to get very creative with his water intake in a few critical situations. When he stumbles across an old Muslim shrine, he finds bats hanging from the ceiling. Desperate for nutrients and moisture, he makes a drastic decision. He grabs a handful of bats, decapitates them, and drinks their blood and eats their organs. Over time, he finds other ways to secure water. He squeezes the juices from succulents and eats snakes, lizards, and rats. As his food supply dwindles, these unconventional sources of nutrients become essential to his survival. On 2 separate occasions, a helicopter and an airplane fly right over his head, but despite his efforts to catch their attention, they fail to see him and fly away. It's after these moments that Mauro feels the most dejected. One night, he tries to take his own life by slitting his wrists in the shrine. He figures that this way, his death will be quicker and less painful than a slow death by hunger and dehydration in the desert. It'll also be easier for people to find his body, ensuring that his family will receive his pension. but it doesn't work. His blood is too clotted for him to die, and he wakes up in the morning alive. But ironically, his suicide attempt sparks a new will to live within him. Against all odds, Mauro eventually stumbles across a community of nomadic herders near an oasis. The women there give him food and water until the local police find him. It turns out he's in Algeria, about 180 miles off course. He's lost almost 40 pounds, and it would take his body 2 years to fully recover. But what's even more incredible, Mauro goes back to finish what he started, returning to the MDS just a few years later. In fact, he returned 6 other times, finishing as high as 13th in 2001. Now, I have no idea what causes someone like Mauro to return to this race after cheating death once, let alone returning 6 times. But it seems that beyond the urge just to complete the race, he says he's caught desert fever. Mauro Prosperi's story is fortunately an incredibly rare one. For the most part, people have managed to stay on course despite the race's conditions. And because of Mauro's experience, runners are now equipped with large flares to call for help. The marathon is now in its 39th edition, coming up in April 2025. Each year, participation averages over 1,000 runners from around 60 nations, with the average age being around 50 years old. As we've seen, some participants return year after year. The most recent repeat runner of note is Rachid El Morabiti from Morocco. Last April, he secured his 10th victory, matching Lahcen Ahansal's record and solidifying his status as a new legend of the race. As for rules, current regulations require participants to be over 18 and provide documents proving their medical and physical wellness. Now, the race isn't cheap either. Each person must pay about $4,000 to enter, plus additional costs for gear. Entrance fees cover the flight, hotel, and transportation through the desert. Because of that, many runners seek sponsors to fund their race wearing their logo as they run. Many participants also raise money for greater causes. The top runners win up to $5,500 in prize money. With a dedicated medical team, the worst-case scenario for most people is simply having to withdraw. About 10% of runners drop out each year, sometimes more if the race faces unexpected challenges. Some years are drier than usual, others are too humid. In 2009, a flood, yes, a flood in the desert, washed away the planned route, forcing the organization to plan stages on the fly. In 2021, about half of participants withdrew due to abnormal temperatures and a circulating stomach bug. For those who must leave early, it's devastating, whether they're experienced runners or novices. And this brings us back to Duncan Slater, the British veteran who, after an infection in his amputated legs, was forced to pull out of his first race in 2016. But his story does not end there. In 2017, Duncan is back at the starting line with a new set of prosthetic legs, once again ready to conquer a challenge that seemed impossible years ago. Despite the dehydration, pain, and intense heat, Duncan triumphantly crosses the finish line after 7 days, becoming the first double amputee to do so.
A little bit of it is bloody minding this, and I think some people along the way say we don't think you can do it, so you want to prove people wrong because, you know, I'm lucky I get the opportunity to do these things, so I want to complete them, I want to do it, I want to show people that you can do it.
In the end, pain, heat, and exhaustion are not enough to stop the approximately 30,000 people who have participated in the Marathon des Sables since its founding. If anything, pain seems to remind us that we're alive, healthy, and able to endure whatever the world throws at us. Pain reminds us that we're human. The ability to endure is how one runner describes it in an interview for the Netflix docuseries Human Playground. Released in 2022, Human Playground features the Marathon des Sables from the perspective of runner Amy Palmera Winters. She's 51 years old, a mother, an experienced and accomplished runner, and also an amputee. She lost her left leg below the knee in a motorcycle accident decades ago. Despite the blisters from her prosthetic, crippling cramps throughout her body, and the burning smell of her skin, she became the first woman amputee to complete the race. The pain is what helps her achieve amazing things. And maybe it's something we can all learn from. In a world where pain is inevitable, why not face it on your own terms, using it to build yourself up, push your limits, and conquer the unimaginable? In Amy's own words,
"Pain is my playground."
Thanks so much for listening to Sportly. Sportly is an Immigrantly Media production. This episode was produced by Sadia Khan and Shay Yu, written by Michaela Strother, Shay Yu, and me, Kavitha Davidson. Our sound designer and editor is Paroma Chakravarti. Our theme music was created by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Tune back next week and every week after for more Sportly.